This program contains subject matter and language that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised.
I just had the dumbest text conversation I had in a long time. Somebody with a degree trying to tell me something. She African American. I'm an American. Not gonna trick me with that shit. That's what they want you to think. You ain't American. Motherfucker, if my ancestors helped build this son of a bitch, why would I say I'm African? I never been to Africa. I ain't African American. I'm a fucking American.
We're not asking permission. We're gonna tell our story. And you're gonna listen. I'm gonna try it.
They don't know our story. Yeah. They don't know what we've been through, baby. They're all on the outside looking in. But we still gon' do what we want to. Touching conversations. A bunch of apologizing and explaining, but we live and we learn. Hey, I bet they ain't think that we would make it, but we overcame it. This shit ain't nothing to play with. Family over everything is still the same shit, and I wouldn't trade it for nothing. Nah, we've been through hell and back, but we're still standing on all 10. Hey, you know how we do it, we go all in. Yeah, it's us over everybody. I when it's trouble in paradise, nosy motherfuckers wanna hear about it. Let's be clear about it. We don't make decisions based on their opinions. We can't expect, nor can we make them see the vision, as long as we know the business. Cause they don't know our story. Yeah. They don't know what we've been through, baby. They're all on the outside looking in. Gotta keep on fighting for who and what you believe in. Believe me, cause I ain't going nowhere, baby. I'll be here till the end of time. Take no chances, I won't jeopardize. No, I won't. Cause true love only happens once. I know my past ain't pretty, but she still ride with me, yeah. You see, this ain't for everybody. I when it's trouble in paradise, these nosy motherfuckers wanna hear about it. Let's be clear about it. We don't make decisions based on their opinions. We can't expect, nor can we make them see the vision, as long as we know the business. Cause they don't know our story. Yeah. They don't know what we've been through, baby. They're all on the outside looking in.
Reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we're coming to get our check.
Alito Tribe, I'm your host, Chief Cali, and welcome to another episode of Our Story, 1968, Indian Civil Rights. Now, in our previous and opening episode of this series, I made an attempt to help some viewers who may be watching this docuseries, but possibly may be hearing this information for the very first time, get a better understanding of our reasons behind the why of creating this docuseries. Now, as we move forward into episode 2, I mentioned some things in the previous episode that you will need to keep in mind all throughout this series. Things such as, in 1968, there was a specific group of people organized, marching, protesting, and fighting right alongside many of our leaders in the so-called Negro, or Black community. Leaders such as Adam Clayton Powell, Malcolm X, Dr. Reginald Hawkins, and arguably one of the most recognized civil rights leaders of our time, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In this fight, this specific group of people not only fought for their civil rights, their fight also included the rights for humanity. Not just for themselves, but for all people.
100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And finds himself in exile in his own land. Himself in exile in his own land.
Some people think you're crazy if you talk to yourself. I think you're crazy if you don't.
Before the Pilgrims got here, we were here. The Negro finds himself in exile in his own land. Before the Pilgrims got here, we were here. Indian Civil Rights Act. Nigger refers to it. Before the Pilgrims got here, we got here. What does that mean? Before the Pilgrims, we were here. Wait. The Negro finds himself in exile in his own land.
We were here.
I don't know what does that mean? What does that mean? Own land. America. His own land. Okay. So he's fighting for Indian civil rights. Indians, same thing. Before the Pilgrims got here, we were here. Nigger, American Indian. The Negro finds himself in exile in his own land. So we're gonna go fight for American Indians because the American Indians are niggers and are Negroes, and Negro find himself in exile in his own land because before the Pilgrims got here, we were here.
The 1968 Civil Rights Movement led by Dr. King also came with a few very interesting nicknames attached to it. Nicknames such as the Indian Civil Rights Act, the Indian Bill of Rights, and there was also a fight for public Indian housing, also known as the Fair Housing Act of 1968, and today known by many as HUD or Section 8. Indians. Why was there such an emphasis put on Indians for the 1968 Civil Rights Movement? That's a good question. At the start of this series, I told you you'd be hearing from a group of Americans from various parts of the country who identify as the original Americans. And with that being said, I told you there's always a reason behind the why. And one of the reasons behind the why of this docuseries was definitely the reclassification of the real American Indians of North America.
While the primary target of Racial Integrity Act of 1924 was the African American community, some saw the Virginia Indian community as a threat, because as long as a person had not more than 1/16 Indian blood quantum, the Racial Integrity Act of 1924 allowed persons of white and Virginia Indian ancestry to be classified as white. Supporters of the law, including Dr. Walter Plecker, we know who he is. The registrar for Virginia's Bureau of Vital Statistics saw this exception for the Indians as an opportunity for persons of mixed heritage to move from the colored category to the white category. Officials from the State Bureau of Vital Statistics actively sought to denigrate persons of Virginia Indian descent and deny them the right to identify as Indians or white, instead of forcing them to be declared colored. So they had an option to become white. So I would say some of them did become white. And a lot of them became colored. And guess which one became white? The ones that had the light skin.
The Racial Integrity Act of Virginia was signed into law in 1924. The law was the brainchild of a physician, eugenicist, Walter Ashby Plecker. Plecker was born April 2nd, 1861. About 10 days later, Plecker's father, who was a wealthy merchant and slave owner, joined the Civil War that kicked off on April 12th, 1861. So this is the atmosphere that Plecker was born in. He was a staunch white supremacist, white nationalist. He basically grew up in the elite society of the antebellum South. And he was sent to, I think it's called Staunton, Virginia, to complete his elementary school years. He then joined a military academy, and then later on went to Maryland University and graduated with his medical degree.
If we want to break it down and be technical, did this apply to all the Indians? No. Because there was still people able to identify as Indians. However, even if we go to the actual document, which we're going to definitely put up, the actual document, what you're going to see is who was he attacking when he reclassified Indians as color? He was specifically attacking the Negro. And how do we know he was specifically attacking the Negro? Because he was doing that, and he said one of his motives was because he thought that the Indians was hiding Africans in the tribe.
The Negro Act of 1740 turned Indians not at peace with the government into slaves in the 18th century using pen and paper. And then these Indians that they declared to be slaves were then declared to be extinct. The Racial Integrity Act was another act of paper genocide on American Indians. Negro Act 1790. Section 1, the Act of 1740, Section 1 declares all Negroes and Indians, free Indians in amity with the government, Negroes, mulattoes, and mestizos who are now free, accepted to be slaves, the offspring to follow the condition of the mother, and that such slaves are chattels personal. Skin tone was the evidence that made a slave a Negro, mestizo slave, or an Indian slave. What in their eyes was the Negro color and the Indian color. Natives, the ones people think of when they think of natives, sure don't go around talking about getting enslaved in the 18th century and made extinct due to this act, do they? Generally, they barely ever talk about being enslaved at all, but the Indians were, which is why we call ourselves Indians and not Native Americans. Section 3, Indians and the descendants of Indians are regarded as free Indians. Well, who are the free Indians? These are the free Indians. So there were Indians who were at peace with the government at the time and Indians who were not. Once they made Indians who weren't at peace with the government into slaves through this act, they declared these Indians extinct on paper. They were now slaves instead of Indians. These are classes and statuses. Their descendants inherited their slave status passed on by the mother. Negro, black became their new slave statuses, and their descendants and people who had a certain phenotype that they deemed to be so-called black or seemed to have a little more black in them are now classified as black and African American. Remember, we talked about the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. It proclaimed the existence of only two racial categories, colored and white. The law stripped Native Americans and members of other groups with dark skin of their land, voting rights, and legal identity. The fight for our freedom started in 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation, but this is the Civil Rights Act, aka the Indian Civil Rights Act, aka Rat Brown Law. Now, what's that? It's when Herbert Rat Brown made it possible for us to vote. Yes, all of these laws and legislations are about us.
When he first graduated, he went into obstetrics, and he worked with women of all races. His mother was instrumental in women's health, and he stayed in that particular field until she died in 1915. After 1915, he became a public health systems doctor in one of the counties in Virginia. I'm not real sure exactly what it is right at the top of my head, but he did that for a while, and that was around, I guess, 1912, 1914. And then after his mother died, he started looking at other avenues, and he took a job finally as Virginia's first vital records registrar in 1912. And he stayed there until about 46. Plecker was always trying to make sure that he kept racial issues in the forefront, always raising them before other white prominent people. Even within his Presbyterian church, he was a fundamentalist in the southern branch of the Presbyterian church. And his belief was that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because of racial mixing. So that was kind of his catalyst for making sure that the races did not mix. And I do believe that that was one of the things that really pushed him.
Yeah, man, Walter Plecker is one of them people, if I'm not mistaken, he was the first registrar in Virginia, had his hands on reclassifying the indigenous people, man. He was involved in the Bureau of Vital Statistics or whatnot, and he had his hands in turning all of the American Indians into, Negroes and coloreds and things of that nature. And, it's there to be discovered.
American Indians of blood classified as Black, Negro, or Mulatto on census records. Since the beginnings of the Africa slave trade in America, many Native American persons have, unfortunately, to the detriment of Indian heritage, were listed as Black, Mulatto, or Negro in order for white slave owners to keep an ample supply of slaves. Many blood Indians have lost a God-given heritage due to slavery in southern state, in which approximately 24,000 or more full-blood American Indians of color, men, women, and children alike, were forced by white slave owner to take part in slavery, and with that travesty starting from the first census ever taken in America, Indians were falsely listed on all census records as Negro, Black, or Mulatto, an error which was passed down from generation to generation to the present. If you know you're Indian and don't know why you can't find census records stating this, it is because of white census takers being instructed to ignore Indian heritage and paint mostly southern states in America with either black or white populations. Go over you grandparents' oral history, and if you are a person of color and have a strong family history of Indian blood and census records that don't match, you are more than likely of Indian heritage and have had your heritage stripped from you.
So with the Walter Plecker and around that area, one of the things you have to remember at all times are the times, the dates. When did all this stuff happen? Because sometimes things will happen in the 1700s and we'll talk about them like they happened in the 1900s. The dates. What was going on when Walker Plecker was saying these things?
I'ma drop this gem on y'all and I'ma let y'all go, man. I'ma let y'all go. Watch this. This is the Indian training schools. They had schools to teach them how to be Indians. Watch this, y'all. Nah. Look what it said. What did they do in the Indian training schools? Watch this. They taught them such things they taught them such as farming and housekeeping. Now come on y'all. If they from this land, why they teaching them how to farm this land?
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.
Basically, they couldn't kill the Indians off the way that they wanted to kill the Indians off, so they had to reclassify us on paper, you know? We talking about the Racial Integrity Act of 1924. This is very monumental because when we look at them old pictures, what do we see? We see a whites-only water fountain, and then we see a colors-only water fountain. Who were those colored people? Y'all gotta answer that question for us. Who were those colored people? We know who those colored people was. Okay, boom, now let's rewind it. Let's go back to the Racial Integrity Act. The Racial Integrity Act, what do you see? They said they reclassified those Indians as what? Colored, right? So, I never in my life heard of Native Americans being called colored. So, something ain't adding up, something ain't making sense. Where in history did this happen, and why are we the only ones that's bringing light to this happening? And now that we bringing light to this happening, they want to talk about, oh, colored meant them or colored meant this. Nah, we know who colored is. We know who colored meant. We know who the Indians is, point blank, period. But it was very treacherous. You got to understand your ability to identify. They was killing, they was hanging Indians for this. In Virginia, and it spread throughout the whole United States. It started in Virginia, but it spread. You know, they all had to adopt these things because one of the problems is that you got to understand that these people need a claim somewhere. They need to claim stake somewhere. So the only way they could claim stake is to make sure that these people who were Indians no longer can identify as Indians.
But they weren't marching for no Civil Rights Act. These people were marching for the right to be who they are on their own homeland.
It was all about the naming.
Yep, because in order for us to vote, to get an ID, to do any of this, we had to drop the Indian name and be called Negroes. That is the only way that we were able to be inducted into society like that. This is why my great-great-great-grandmother chose to have her child and make paperwork out of her so that she can have the same freedoms that everybody else did that she did not want. She wanted her child to be able to blend into society and to sustain life. But when it came to my great-great-grandmother, when she had Momo, she raised Momo in the same way that she was, the way she was conditioned is how she raised Momo. This is why when you look at Momo, Momo kind of resembles a boarding school kid.
Right.
Because her mother is a boarding school kid. So when it came to the Civil Rights Act, she just flat out told me, this man marched down Locust Street, Philadelphia, Mississippi, straight down Locust Street past her house.
He was coming through South.
She said when she looked up and saw that man out there, because she was excited. You know what I'm saying? This is Dr. King. She said when she looked up on them posters, she said, wait a minute now. That say Indian Negro. Who is the Indian Negro? She was confused. My great grandmother was confused.
Look at the document on Channel 10. It'll show you the design.
They starting to come out with these photos now. People didn't realize if your people are hoarders, like my great grandma had all that paperwork, they weren't hoarding it. You need to sit down, go through that paperwork, because you are throwing away your history.
Important.
You throwing away potentially somebody else's link to their lineage, because you don't know who was in those photos. You may be looking at somebody's actual family member that they could not find. Now they got a photo, and wait a minute, why my family member standing here holding this photo, hollering about Hindi? That type of stuff. If I'm not mistaken, in Momo's room somewhere, she got a picture of Martin Luther King. But the person standing behind him and on the side of him, them signs don't say nothing about no Civil Rights Act. You even get hints of the Indian Child Welfare Act coming to play with it. Even though it was a little bit like
it went out not so much of that in 68. In 68, a lot of people were thinking that Mississippi was the most prejudiced state. No, the state of Tennessee was the most prejudiced state in the South.
Why? Because it's the crown of the South. It is meant to block everything else off from the South. The reason people think Mississippi is the most racist part of the South is because that is and was the capital of the Mississippian Empire.
Right.
The reclassification of the American Indian was something serious, and it's still serious even today as we continue to allow ourselves to be reclassified over and over again.
On this day in 1988, a group of black leaders, including Reverend Jesse Jackson and representatives from the NAACP, met to discuss the national black agenda. It was here that Jackson and his peers catapulted the term African American into the country's lexicon.
Jesse and I used to have this argument. Jesse Jackson. When he started talking about, African American. I said, Jesse, no, I ain't buying that.
People don't understand. Black people did not just come from Africa. Black people were already in the States. And people got to do their history to understand black people were already in the States. People don't know that, though. They don't get that part. So people don't really know that not all black people did not come from freaking Africa. Not all black people did not come from freaking Africa. Because it's going to be very, very difficult for you to make it in that goddamn ship at the bottom of that goddamn ship for 3 months. When the food get low. Do the math. For real. Do the motherfucking math. Seriously. And just ushering everybody in on boats the long goddamn way. They not stopping. Ain't no bathrooms on that motherfucker. Come on now. Do the math. That's all you gotta do is do the motherfucking math. For real. The human body won't last that long. You on a boat for 30 days, you ain't eating nothing but fucking slop. And feces and shit of the motherfucker that's sitting next to you. You're gonna die of disease, man. It's gonna be like 3 black people left whose bodies are physically fit enough to be able to withstand all that pressure under the goddamn ship. Come on. Keep that shit, bro.
I'm from Africa. I'm from Crenshaw Mafia. I can deny you from Africa.
I'm from Africa, you from Africa, you African booty scratcher.
When I went to Africa for the first time, it was the biggest shock of my life. Because I'm going back home. I couldn't wait. I'm going back home. I'm going to Africa for the first time.
Africa.
Oh man, yeah. And I went with a powerful delegation. I went to Nigeria. They checked into the hotel. And I said, I'll check in, I'll see y'all later. I'm going to find my people. I'm home. Them brothers look at me like I was crazy. They don't claim us, we claim them. They say, y'all, he called me a colored boy.
He said, the African call you?
A colored boy. He said we would not allow them to treat us the way y'all allow them to treat y'all.
The term has been used since the 1970s, but never gained widespread acceptance until after this Chicago convention. Reverend Jackson said, to be called African Americans has cultural integrity. It puts us in our proper historical context. Every ethnic group in this country has a reference to some land base, some historical cultural base. African Americans have hit that level of cultural maturity.
I'm not from Africa. 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 Listen, I don't eat African food. I'm not from Africa. I don't know no African holidays. I don't know no African presidents. I don't know no African. Listen, man, I don't know nothing about Africa. I don't know nothing about Africa, and most of y'all don't either. I'm talking about like 85% of y'all don't know neither. Stop telling me I'm from Africa. Look, you wanna know where I'm from? Look at me very, very close. Listen to me. I am an American. You know what that is? That's an American. I am from here, copper person. Look, put a penny to my skin. Look, I'm copper. I'm not an African, man. Please don't keep calling me African. Ain't no Africans never came to America and told none of these foreigners to stop fucking with us, or they gonna blow some shit up in the name of anything going on for us, man. Africa. I'm not from Africa. I'm not from Africa.
Everything you got from us. Did you a voodoo slave girl who graced us with her black magic? She couldn't tell a love potion from a recipe for chocolate chip cookies if she had to read it. You made her a slave. Before that, she came from a great tribe, the Arawak. She learned the secrets of the other side from a 2,000-year-old line of shamans, necromancy. She gave it to your girls of Salem.
My folks is not from Africa. And a lot of people in this room, folks, ain't from Africa.
I'm Chuck Berry.
Chuck Berry's a country and western singer. Says he's Chuck Berry.
Let me see some ID.
Well, all right, then. ID.
This license says you Indian.
All black people did not come from freaking Africa.
This license says you Indian. My folks is not from Africa. And a lot of people in this room, folks, ain't from Africa.
Mighty Cootify-o.
Oh, we all are Indian. I mean, Indian. I say, Indians of the nation. I mean, the whole wide creation. I want you to go to the Library of Congress and pull up the information about their former schools. About their Indian schools, y'all. Come on now. Why they gotta teach people that's from here how to form here? Now watch this. You see how it said that the school stopped in the 1930s? You know why? Because at that point, Walter Plecker had already made the Indians Negroes. I want you to go look into Walter Plecker, how he turned the Indians into Negroes. I'm been knowing that. I knew that years ago. In 1924, they came up with a thing called the Indian Removal Act. And the reason why they stopped the schools, you want to know why they stopped the schools? Because at that point, they thought that they had took all the Indian out of us. But they didn't understand that our family was passing it down orally. Told us what we were.
What was the main things that was happening? If you think about it, a lot of our people were coming in off the land. They were getting jobs in these cities. They were getting into the Industrial Revolution. And when all those people came up, it was a lot. Because a lot of times they like to say that we're the minority. Where do you go in the world and the indigenous people are the minority? You don't. So they had to put it in not just our minds, but everybody else's minds too. That's why today you'll see what you're saying, why people get mad, because they were taught, no, you the Indians. No, you are. And all Indians are what would you call an Indian? People who did work, contract work, independent, indigenous. Those were those people. Those were you. You're the one coming off the land, so you know how to do all the work. You know how to do everything. Everything that everybody does, they learned it from you. Unfortunately, you think you came from somewhere else, so you wipe all of that out. See, that's the purpose of reclassifying you. So like my grandmother and grandfather, they wasn't on that African stuff. They like, what are you talking about? So you had to get rid of them and teach their kids certain things. So one of the things, how they taught you were African, we'll get right back to the Walter Plecker, but this has to be said. They started bringing in movies, TV, radio to teach you that, and so my grandparents were born in the late 1800s, early 1900s. They came off the farms and the land. So when they moved to the city, their children had to be educated in this system that we wanted to get into. And they just started training them totally different from what their parents were taught or what their parents knew. Because if you go back to your grandparents, great-great-grandparents, it'll be said that, oh, they only had a 6th grade education. Oh, they only had a 3rd grade education. But they were genius. So this cat, Walter Plecker, these people filling into these cities, Walter Plecker had to say, you know what? We got to reclassify these cats and meld ourselves into their culture. That was the Racial Integrity Act. They're trying to get rid of you and try to tell other people, try to use other terms and names to let other people slide in. And it worked.
Like as far as the gentleman Walter Plecker, who I think it was 1922 or 23, came up with the Reclassification Act, which is just another one of their strategies to change the narrative to suit their goals. You know, and basically you can Google Walter Plecker, you can Google anything nowadays and find that information that was one of the means of taking the people off of the land. When you call somebody something other than what they are, and you're in a powerful position like the position that he was in, these things turn into laws. You know, so this is how we basically got into a situation that our grandmothers, great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers and everything went from being Choctaw and Chitimacha and Cherokee to being Negro, colored, mulatto, and all of these kind of things that disconnects you from the land. The same as saying that basically your ancestors are from Africa takes you off of this land. And that is to the benefit of the adversary, you know, because in reality, all people who look the way that we look didn't get to this land on the slave ship. Our ancestors were already here and had been here millennia before there was a Europe or a European.
And here in New Orleans, in Louisiana, the Walter Plecker of Louisiana was Naomi Drake. And I want everybody to know this woman's name because she was more devastating than Walter Plecker. She stopped marriages. She did so many things that were so evil towards the indigenous people of Louisiana that it was really, really, really perplexing how she got away with all of that.
Yet I would like to speak about Walter Plecker dealing with the reclassification that he done against Aboriginal people in Virginia, which actually became the template for all vital statistics in the so-called 50 states of the United States of America. When people went into the hospitals, right, with their nationality of being tribal people, he would take and classify those who were light-skinned as being white and those who was of melanin hue as being colored. And when they come out of the hospital dealing with paperwork, that's when the paper terrorism actually began, you know, which they've been doing paper terrorism or paper genocide against we the Aboriginal people of this land mass, which is now called North America. And it has never stopped. They still do reclassification when you go fill out an application for a job or an application to get a loan or an application to go to school or an application just to trying to get a house, you know what I'm saying, dealing with homestead acts and everything. So they still have you putting down colored or African American or Negro or black, even dealing with the United States Census, they still have you being reclassified. But the thing is, once the pen is in your hand and you have knowledge of self and your family of being the Indians with your grandmother, your great-grandmother and grandfather, your great-grandfather been told you, you're supposed to sign that. And that's how you actually take control of basically reclassifying yourself back into the family of nations. And that's your responsibility and duty. You know, you don't let nobody else classify you, you know, and that's where it comes down to, you know, because even with the application, I actually asked my little cousin, she was like, well, I put black and I put / African American. I said, well, what's the difference between black and African American? You know what I'm saying? And you know you're Indian. But she said, I don't want to go through all that, Pop. I said, why not? I say, you have the pen. The power is the pen. So you got it. Put who you are. Don't be ashamed. And you know what? Some people do be ashamed to put that they are Indian. You know? And I think that came from the 70s too, because that also transpired because, you know, with the Black Power movement going on in the 70s, they would try to make those who claim to be Indians feel less than who they were because they used to get picked on to say, oh, that person don't want to be black. They talk about they got Indian in their family or they are the Indian, you know, and it would shame the people. So the people would be like, well, okay, they would bow down and say that they was black or Afro-American at that time in the 70s and the 80s, you know. So it actually did self perpetuation and continuation of them being reclassified. So now they're doing it amongst themselves now, unconsciously not knowing that they're doing mass genocide against themselves, dealing with paper genocide, you know. But this season of 2010, I think, when they did the U.S. Census, they took Negro off there, like what Barack Obama said, well, once they took Negro off, then what you gonna call yourself now? You know, this gave you the opportunity to correct your status. So what Walter Plecker did, it still plagues our people to this very day. To this very day, you know. So now what we have to do is, once again, no petition is not gonna get them to reclassify that they classified to be reclassified of who they're supposed to be. You don't go to them and ask to be reclassified. No, the power is in your hand when you have the pen. And you say, well, I remember my grandmother say this, so I'm going to go ahead and put that on the application. This is who I am. Because when they say Native American or American Indian or Alaskan Native, you check that box and you put where your tribe is. you put what your tribe is. So who going to deny it? You know, just like dealing with the DRIP, you know, dealing with the Declaration of Rights of the Indigenous People. You have that right to classify yourself what your parents and them told you, your grandparents. So the power is in your hand.
Man, Walter Plecker. Woo. That man, boy. Man. You know, when we talk about you know, who we are as a people, at one point I think we knew who our family was. You know, we knew where we came from. What Walter Plecker did was he pretty much grouped and categorized us into one category, you know, one classification. So that's what they call reclassification. You know, a lot of people say, oh, you know, the people who were here were killed off, you know, and we can go by whatever name you want to go by. You know, those are arguments in itself, but let's just say, you know, he was responsible. He worked, one we got to understand, he worked for the city or the state at the time, the government. Let's just say the government, right? He was in charge of pretty much. It was a type of a census. You know, they'll let you know exactly who's where, what area, what they were called. Most of the time, people were pretty much classified by what's in the area that they were in. So you get, you know, it was a lot of descriptive terms. So they say it was thousands of tribes here at one particular time. You know, what were those tribes' names? A lot of tribes went by last names. A lot of tribes went by areas. But what Walter Plecker did was he went and took all of those different tribe people, the people who were in different tribes, classified them into colored, it evolved, but colored was the main thing. So now, instead of you knowing exactly who you are, now you're just in this one thing. The problem with that is it allowed anybody to be able to classify themselves as that for different benefits. So when you start talking about the $5 Indian and paying to get on different roads and in order to gain land benefits or whatever type of government benefits at the time, it could be tax write-offs. It was so much. I'm not even gonna say there was so much going on. It was pretty much the same thing going on now. You know, that we don't know. Anytime you go into a court, anytime you get a letter in the mail, they say, oh, you got to pay this tax, or you have to pay this, or you have to pay that. All you're doing is just signing yourself into the system. That's all he was in charge of. Hey, you want a piece of this? Here, sign up. The problem is he allowed anybody to do it.
The 1920 census was one of the real pushes for him because he noticed from the statistics that he was able to get from the Census Bureau that there were very little people being listed as mulatto or Negro as in previous censuses. And he believed this was because a lot of people were passing as white, or that blacks were passing as, or Negroes at the time, were passing as Indians. So he did everything that he could to make sure that that did not happen, that these people stayed separate. So you saw him pushing toward, in 1924, when he made the push for the Racial Integrity Act, that was what he was aimed at. And in this act, it basically was a paper genocide. The saying that the pen is mightier than the sword, you can kill off a lot of people with the pen, but you can kill off more people with legislations and rules and laws put into place that designated who they could and could not say they were. And so you had people that previously listed themselves as Indians that were no longer able to say they were Indians. Plecker's Racial Integrity Act did not determine what race somebody was other than white and colored. If you were not white and you were Chinese, you were colored. If you were Hispanic and you were of a darker, maybe what they call a olive colored complexion, you were colored. He did not care what color you were just colored. And so a lot of Indians who were copper colored got designated as colored people, and they lost their standing as Indians.
I would be interested to see the classification of Asians, octoroon, quandaroons, mixtures, and all of the things that they say, everything that is not. I would like to see those on actual documentation to confirm that there were other ethnic groups of people being referred to as colored. Because from my understanding, we have always been the colored people. We was the people at the colored water fountains. I don't remember seeing Mei Ling and none of them at the court. I don't remember my people telling me about them. Now, I don't remember even seeing many depictions of different peoples during civil rights time. It seemed pretty consistently our people being disenfranchised through Jim Crow. So I like I said, I would like to see more evidence and documentation to support that just any and everybody was considered to be colored before I could come to a conclusion about that. Because right now it seems like what's happening is they're reconstructing history, right? What took place with us, now they're going to try to give all those hardships and all of those trials that we pushed through. They want to give it to people who never even truly experienced that. And so, like I said, I would like to see more evidence to support that other people were classified as colored people.
We need answers. We need answers. We're going to pose these questions and we need answers. We need concrete answers. We need sophisticated answers on who was these Negroes, who was these Indians, and who was these colored people. And if y'all can't give us answers on that, then guess what? We gonna provide the answers because we doing the diligent research. Growing up, when I heard about an Indian, when I heard about a Native American, I never in my life heard of them being called colored. But if you watch a movie and you see colored, they talking about colored people, who are they referring to? The colored people are the Indians.
Who are the real Americans? America keep changing and changing and changing. Let's go back in time when the American Indians looked like I look and roamed the southeast part of the United States freely. I love what the mayor said. We have to tell the truth.
Yeah, Indians, niggas, same thing. One of the main plays was to reclassify the Indian. What does that do? That gives other people stake and claim to the land. The most valuable thing is the land, right? This is what everyone is coming here for, the land of the free. This land is your land. All of these things tie into what? People wanting this land. What happened is this was called the New World to who? This the old world to us. It's the new world to them. They came over here to seek what? A better life, right? And now, even to this day, it's people coming over here to do what? Seek a better life, right? But on the backs of the original people of this land. But we talk about this reclassification thing. We talk about us being the indigenous people of this land, and you got these people saying we not X, Y, and Z, but yet they got the colonizers inside their tribes running.
Now, maybe we say politically correct or not politically correct. They don't look like Indians to me, and they don't look like Indians to Indians, and a lot of people are laughing at it. Yeah, Indians, niggas, same thing. Now, maybe we say politically correct or not politically correct. They don't look like Indians to me, and they don't look like Indians to Indians, and a lot of people are laughing at it.
I look at it like this. They said, first we're going to pretend, first we're going to replace them with these people. You know what? We run everything. We ain't got to even pretend no more. We about to just full-blown join the tribes ourselves. Now you got colonizers and Europeans full-blown in the tribe. They ain't even trying to hide it no more. They ain't even trying to hide it no more. And one of the main things about reclassification that we gotta pay attention to is even on Congress.gov. Matter of fact, I got on my phone right now. I'm about to pull it up. Shit, receipts. So boom, you go to Congress.gov, right? You type in H.Rep 110 to 124, right? And then you're gonna see Thomasina E. Jordan, Indian Tribes of Virginia Federally Recognized Act, right? You go on there, and then you're gonna scroll down to 57. And when you scroll down to 57, you're gonna see something very, very important. Boom, you scroll to 57, and it says in plain sight, the Virginia Vital Statistics Bureau, right? Why is that important? Why is the Virginia Vital Statistics Bureau important? Because that's where Walter Plecker was the head of. So I'm about to reiterate again. Boom. The Virginia Vital Statistics Bureau classed all non-reservation Indians as Negro. Who were the Negroes in history? They classified them as Negroes, so we gotta ask these questions. Who were these Negroes?
Negro voter registration has already more than doubled. Now with this bill, the voice of justice speaks again. It proclaims that fair housing for all human beings who live in this country is now a part of the American way of life. We affirm through law that men equal under God are also equal when they seek a job, when they go to get a meal in a restaurant, or when they seek lodging for the night in any state in the Union. And now the Negro families no longer suffer the humiliation of being turned away because of their race.
Who were these Negroes? Who were these colored people? These were our ancestors. So when we talk about reclassification, yes, it was a very real thing. And this is one of the main things that becomes a problem when it comes to us identifying ourselves to this day. But if you do paperwork, you do anything that you do, you got to identify who you are. Why are they asking that? If who you is don't matter, why are they asking you in every application to identify yourself? I need y'all to think about this.
As we bring this episode to a close, and many of you have gotten a chance to see information presented dealing with the reclassification of the real American Indians of North America. Hopefully, as we move forward, this will help you understand the reason behind the why of this docuseries, Our Story, 1968 Indian Civil Rights. We got a lot more to go, but for this episode, we're gonna close out. And I wanna leave you with saying, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. It's up to you to do that. Until next time, see you next episode. Peace, tribe.